This is a podcast which does not shy away from difficult and vulnerable topics. The content is of an adult nature and we do swear at times.
Welcome to the Autistic Licence podcast. I'm Siana and I'm in Carrickfergus in Northern Ireland.
I'm Leo in London.
We invite you to listen in on our conversations as we experiment with unmasking in an autistic space. We talk about what it means to discover we're autistic as adults, especially with established careers as therapists. We want people to know that autistic therapists exist and to broaden the conversation about neurodiversity. You're so welcome to join us, whoever you are and wherever in the world you are. We hope you'll find something of interest and connection here.
Hamilton. You've gone to see Hamilton.
Mm-hmm.
Which is amazing.
Because Leo watched it at the same time.
We decided, I'd seen a little bit of it because on Disney Plus they have a Broadway production film that's up there, and I'd seen a little bit of it and I never watched the whole thing. So we decided to schedule curtain up time to be simultaneous. I would watch it on TV while you were watching the London production live, and it pretty much, I think, the sync up worked really well actually. So I just thought it was just wonderful. I was in a very different position because I was at home, probably in pyjamas or certainly very comfy, on a lovely comfy sofa at the temperature I had chosen. You know, everything about my environment as I was at home was just right for me. And you don't get, obviously, that same sense of control in the theatre with hundreds of other people around you too.
Yes, well, we had planned it that we were at the very, 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 very back.
This is your favourite place in a live venue, isn't it?
My favourite place is against a wall with no one behind me. Yes, I really, really don't like the proximity of people being behind me. And it so happens that you can get decently priced tickets at the very, very back. So it wasn't extortionate either. Our seats were really nice. It was an absolutely beautiful theatre venue. All of that was great. My challenge from an autistic point of... my challenge, because it wouldn't be all autistic people, but for me was I hadn't done any preparation in terms of... I didn't know the storyline. I didn't know the songs. I didn't know any of that. It's all musical. There's no dialogue.
It's rapid. It's
too fast
very, very clever, very complex wordplay throughout.
I couldn't. Lana already had a, semi-special interest. For an autistic person, I'd say it's semi. It's not like a special interest, a spin, but it's close to it, and it's probably well up. She was well up on knowing.
So she had some familiarity with what was
actually
in.
Loads. Not to the degree of an autistic spin. There's other things that are more.
She couldn't recite it all the way through.
but lots of it, 3/4 of it.
Yes.
So she knew all the music. She knew what was coming. She knew the story. And she would say that you kind of... it would have been much better for me if I had that in advance. It wasn't like I refused to do it, I just didn't think of it. Because any other theatre production we've been to before has been much gentler and much slower, and you can just go and enjoy it for what it is. I was not prepared for this at all. So they started, and the men kind of are doing it in very, very quick rap. The women, when they sing, it tends to be more ballads, which is a little bit slower. So I could tend to pick up on what the women were saying, but I was only following parts of the story. And the more lost I became with what the men were, mostly the men were saying, and most of the key characters are men, so it's dominant in that kind of way. I was getting more and more lost and more upset by that, because I just couldn't follow it. And at home, when I watch TV, I always have the subtitles on, and I realised that if I had been reading that, I really would have got it. It's like that kind of thing we talked about before, about like only yesterday, about oral as opposed to learning from what you read.
That's right.
And there was nothing for me to read. So I couldn't even have that as a reassurance to go, okay, I'll listen to that and then I'll look down here and I'll just check I'm getting it. No stage direction, no nothing. There was none of that. So it was very discombobulating. I very rarely use that word, but that's exactly the word that it was. Yes. Because I felt so disabled by the context, like that I couldn't follow it. And I also wore the loops, which were brilliant.
Yes.
So from an autistic point of view, that really helped in terms of the volume.
Yes.
Also, interestingly, I have reflected, the loops soothed me into a withdrawal that I chose to enter into because I was feeling distress.
So can I just track that? The volume was turned down a little to something tolerable by you wearing loops in your ears.
That's right.
And that allowed you to bring your other senses kind of in line with that lower level. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, but it also, on reflection and realising afterwards, it allowed me to enter into more of a dissociative response than if I hadn't have had them in. So at this point, there's more to the story, but at this point, just to mention that it's neither good nor bad, but it certainly allowed me to enter my own bubble in a way that if I hadn't have had the loops in, I would have been out and in and present. This allowed me to not be present.
I often think of that, if this is a helpful illustration of, if you're trying to describe because you're not talking about complete dissociation, you're talking about just stepping inside a little more. There's a sensation, I don't know if this is familiar to people, when you're ill, so particularly if you have a head cold, and kind of your nose is blocked, your ears are blocked, you're a bit more sensitive to light. I always think of that feeling, I've always described it, I think even as a kid, as taking one or two steps back into your head, that you're not quite at the front facing the world. And this sounds ever so similar to that.
I love what you've described because that's exactly what it did. And that, at the time, I believe got me through in a less distressed state or to allow the time to go by. Because obviously, well, not obviously, but, well, I'm sure a lot of people can appreciate that I was with someone who was loving it and in her element. So I wanted to be there. And I was also dealing with really unexpected discomfort myself. And the noise in itself was dealt with, but it was cold. And I don't know, I think this is relevant. I was wearing a dress and therefore didn't have fabric as close around my legs as I have actually had all year so far.
Yes.
Because it was a warm day. It was, and we were dressed up. And the seats were also really close. So, like, your legs could only be in one position.
Yes, that's I remember you reporting that directly at the
When
time.
you're cold, you want to cross your legs. You couldn't even cross my legs. And even if I could, they were freezing and they were bare.
Yes.
There wasn't trousers.
Yes.
So I also couldn't even, I might have liked to just put my legs under myself or hold them to me or curl them or cross them. It wasn't possible. There was no room for anyone. And me and Lana are not big, but both of us felt like, how could you be any bigger than us in those seats? Because if it was uncomfortable for us, we had to have our bags under the seat behind us. There was no room for our seats and bags before the seat in front. So because it was cold and my legs get itchy when I'm cold, and because I couldn't actually adjust to hug myself in or do anything like that, that was really uncomfortable, especially because I couldn't just get into the performance, so I couldn't get out of that. Because Lana said she was cold, but she was totally able to bypass that because she was so in the performance. She was immersed in it. And also she doesn't have such a strong sensitivity to temperature in that way as I do. And it was also because I was losing spoons and not comfortable on lots of different levels that all of that sat together. And what was so disappointing was that I discovered 2 or 3 days later in my junk mail. Did I tell you this? What I found?
But I wonder if it's what I was thinking. Go on, I'll tell you.
I did tell you this. I discovered that the theatre or the ticket people, somebody had sent out, in preparation for your visit, you can download an app which allows you closed captions and an audio transcription.
I didn't know that, but that is what I was thinking. I do know that lots of theatre productions have the facility somehow, and it can be screens at the actual place, or in this case, obviously, a synchronous app that gives you subtitles or closed captions. Okay. And it was in my junk mail. And I had, they had sent me other things to my normal inbox. And I was very good in preparation for this trip and had everything flagged. But that missed you.
That missed me because it was in junk. And a few days later, probably on my way home, nothing better to do but check there's nothing in my junk mail, like I do every few weeks, and it was there. And I was really disappointed because I really appreciated that the fact they do this. I didn't know theatres did this, and that I could have had that, and that would have made it so different, because I would have made it my business once I saw that to have downloaded it, because I know I like subtitles, and then during the production to find out how to make that work for me, and then I would have been delighted to speak about how great it had been. It was definitely, it's nice to know for the future, and it's nice to know that exists, because it's a very real thing. And I guess because I've usually seen things that were slow and easy to understand, it's not been
as much of a priority.
It's been an issue for me, and I don't have a sense of, because I'm autistic, if I go to a show I need such and such. But now I do.
Now you do.
And I know what accommodation
and it's available.
I actually need, and it's available. Just like putting subtitles on the TV, which I really hate watching TV without subtitles.
It occurs to me as a sidebar that at some point when I'm here, we could watch the Broadway production on Disney.
Of Hamilton.
And with subtitles on. And that will give you the context. And then maybe you'll see it again. I would love to go and see it. I've not seen it live.
Well, this is what was so interesting, because I texted you probably at the interval.
You did,
we checked in with each other at the interval.
Yes.
And you were enthusing. This is amazing.
Yes, isn't it wonderful? And I've made this terrible assumption that you were having as an enjoyable and thrilling time as I was.
Which is grand. And, and I was like, can you understand what they're saying? And you were like, I can.
Yes, absolutely.
And I'm going to know all the words within a year.
I will.
You probably will, Leo. And you're so like Lana, that's probably just like, I don't know if it took her a lot of lessons or she was always like that. I don't know that. But so then we had that, and it was very, very different, and realising this is not, I think that's why I qualified it by saying this is not, or it's not like I'm saying, and I never do say all autistics are like this. It's my autistic experience, and there's probably other autistics who would experience it like me, and then other autistics who would experience it like you. So I have no desire now to watch it or to really understand it.
Okay, the reason I thought that might be a thing for you is because of what you miss. But actually, I'm thinking about, there's a similarity between an experience we had this morning where I played you a segment of a podcast, which a very old edition of Radiolab from over 10 years ago, called Musical Language. Link in the description from the last episode, because this is the second time I've referred to it, actually. But you hadn't heard it, and I thought, okay, I'll play you this bit. But then I remembered the bit I wanted to play you was halfway through, and the bit at the beginning was also really fascinating, a separate story. So played you the little section that suddenly I remembered at the beginning, which is probably a little over 5 minutes long. their production style is very busy. Lots of chop edits, lots of sound effects, lots of jumping from one sentence to somebody else and then back again. Now, this is very similar to Hamilton, actually,
Okay.
you know, in the way that the speech is very complex and sophisticated and cross-referential. And you go, oh, that was clever how he mentioned this just after mentioning that and made it scan and made it rhyme, etc. So intensely satisfying to me, overwhelming to you, in that you did enjoy, I think, parts of what we heard. And there was some really very genuinely interesting little segments in there. But that was enough. You needed it to stop then. And that does feel similar to what you experienced in Hamilton. And it's so when I think of, if I'd have had that experience, if I'd have seen or experienced a performance of some kind that was that kind of intricate and required lots of concentration, but also gave you lots of satisfaction because of how clever it is and artistically enriching it is, you know, I would want to go back then, experience it again, fill in the gaps, all that I knew I had missed. And in fact, because I know that I actually do that quite regularly, I'm able to not get frustrated with not being kept. You know, I will just let something wash over me the first time, knowing that I will probably go back if I've enjoyed it. And start filling in the gaps.
Okay.
But for you, you've missed out some stuff because you were overwhelmed. And because you were overwhelmed, maybe, I'm asking, I suppose, is that why you're kind of reticent maybe about going back and experiencing that again? Because part of that experience was discomforting.
It would have to, it would be like, so when I'm reviewing, what I love is, what I actually prefer sometimes in terms of training is, since I've been doing online training, is the recordings, because then I can stop and review the last 5 minutes and listen again and again. Whereas sometimes the host or whatever will kind of encourage you, it's okay, this is going to be recorded, just let it wash over you.
Yes, exactly.
And then watch it again.
Watch
it again. I'm like, I'd rather watch it once properly, but not necessarily without stops and starts and without nothing. And sometimes reviewing, like I can wind something back 3 minutes and listen to that same 3 minutes 5 times to get it right in my head, to make the note that makes it right in my head, and then to go on to the next thing. And it is really stressful for me not to have that processing time in the moment for what's just been said. So
you're not comfortable like I am with the idea of something spontaneous and live, even with the scaffolding, the support of knowing you can go back. It's still that it's going to play out in real time and you can't control that. And so you need the comfort, even on the first run, if you like, of being able to pause. And again, I just feel there's a pang that I'm aware of, that I want you to enjoy Hamilton in the way that I have and am enjoying it. Which is now, you know, possible. It's on TV, there are subtitles, we can pause and restart. But I understand that there's a reticence because of the discomfort that you experienced with the overwhelm of it, which you may or may not. I don't know if that would replay as well, but I understand it. But I'm sad because you will miss out on the things that I enjoyed so much.
And that'll take a lot of spoons. That is that really worth my spoon? And, you know, like, it would be, I think that what has happened to me throughout my life is that I will sit through movies that I didn't understand. Not I will now, I won't now, because I choose what I watch now. But as a student, as a young person, the vast majority, I'd say, of movies, I wouldn't understand half as much as the people around me would understand. I didn't need to. It was just a social event for me. I could switch off and go into my own world, and there would be a bit of a joke. Do you understand that, Siana? No. You know, and or I might ask for some explanations with some patient people at some points. But oftentimes I would assume I wasn't going to understand, assume it was just a social context. And, you know, there would be aspects of that social context, like the conversations afterwards sometimes, or something like that that I would enjoy, but not, I wouldn't follow the movie itself, because by and large, unless it's a very gentle pace, I will not follow a movie, even with spoken language. And in those days I hadn't discovered subtitles. I think it's a bit easier for me now to follow. But for a lot of movies even now, or series even now, I'll miss a lot of it. So there's something where my brain goes into a glitch when it gets like too much, and then it's kind of better for me to zone out, possibly reflect on what I did understand, and then go into my own train of thought and not even try and re-enter, really. And I think that's what I kind of was doing, except that I was so cold. And then I would come back and the girls would sing, the females would sing, it was beautiful, and I would watch the stage play. And so it's not like I didn't take in anything or appreciate anything, but at many points I realised I haven't got a clue what this story is, I don't know what's happening. So but the experience with that podcast that you shared was, it was like a preamble. And it wasn't a preamble. Every part of that podcast, as you explained to me, it's just rapid fire. But yeah, your main aim was to show me one part, but then you showed me, or you let me hear, it's not show, let me hear a part from earlier in, which was fascinating and which captured me. And you could have seen from my, like my attention that I was following it. That 5 minutes I was following, and I was interested, and I had a load of thoughts about it. But then there was a real, like, I can't cope with it jumping to something else, because I needed to reflect and discuss and talk about what I had just heard, and that wasn't being given to me by the podcast, because they weren't doing that. They were just jumping on, and you wanted me to hear the next thing, I guess, although you did switch it off. But your whole point was based on that other story that you were telling me, which was the reason why we were listening to it, which was that had happened, the thing they were about to talk about had happened in that theatre, that people had got distressed.
Yes, by uncomfortable overstimulation of the unfamiliar.
Yes.
Which was the first performance of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. And yes, there was neurology about that. That's what was being discussed.
Yes.
You know, about how the neurons in the brain just went into chaos because they were trying to make sense of sounds they hadn't heard before and didn't know what they meant or what they were. And a violent riot ensued, and this section of the Radiolab podcast was telling that story, essentially. So ironic stroke fascinating that something similar, not as extreme as that, you experienced by listening to an earlier part of that very podcast. In other words, that you got overwhelmed by the chaos of the sound and needed to break, which you absolutely have full awareness of and understood, and said so to me. I need to stop.
And so did you. I need you to stop.
I can't. In fact, you did say, I think what you said was, I can't jump straight into something else now.
And I guess that the thing is that these were not all autistic people who were at the performance.
No, it would have been the general population of Vienna, whenever it was,
at the
last century, maybe. Yes.
And for me, and for them, it was seen to be that it was the introduction of sounds that they were unfamiliar with, whereas this would not be sounds that I'm unfamiliar with. It would be just speed of processing and jumping, transition.
Yes, transition is a big part as well, of course.
I'm not comfortable with, and no amount of exposure and no amount of life experience as an autistic person who struggles obviously with transition can make that comfortable.
Yes.
Because for the people in the concert a year later, they were able to tolerate that.
Totally.
For me, that's not going to change. I'm never going to be able to move that fast.
We talked then, didn't we, about, neural pathways and synaptic pruning and neural pruning, and the fact that because, as we understand it currently, that process of shutting down wasteful or unnecessary neural pathways in an autistic brain doesn't happen, or doesn't happen to the same extent as with neurotypical people. There are many more pathways available for senses and information to come in.
Yeah.
And that's at a massive advantage for a lot of the time, because we can be literally very open-minded about things. Oh, I'd never thought of open-minded as having lots of pathways. Okay, I'm going to keep that.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, is that one of the mechanisms by which we can be sensorially flooded and overwhelmed in the way that you were talking about?
I guess that what is kind of remaining for me is my reflection on using the loops and getting so far into that bubble was that whenever the show had finished, we then had to use the tube again to get back. And I had no spoons really left by then. And having been in the bubble, was comforted by the idea of remaining rather shut down until such times as we could get to the safety of the hotel. And that enabled me to function very efficiently, to, just get very, very focused on we're leaving here, we're going there. I had in my head what stops we were taking and how we would make that happen. But there was a mismatch between that and Lana's relational need to chit-chat excitedly. And if I had have sort of taken the loops out and got into that, I actually wouldn't have had the spoons. I would have used too many spoons, and then I wouldn't have had the spoons to get us back on the tube that I needed, because I'm the one, obviously, I'm the adult. I have to be vigilant about stations and who's getting on where and make sure that, all things like that. So it actually caused me a lot of stress, because I could see that she had certain needs from me, but actually I had needs because of how alarming the journey could have been. I didn't want to become over anxious in that and cause more stress to both of us. That it really suited me to remain in a kind of a numbed out state, to keep the loops in and get the journey home. Now, Lana's very understanding of autism and of her mummy. So, she had a good sense of what was happening, and, we had a lovely time when we got back. We had our treats that we had bought earlier and had a midnight feast, probably a 1 a.m. feast, and, had lovely chats whenever we got back to the safety of the hotel. So it was just kind of realising that with the lack of spoons and with the challenge ahead, that actually it really worked to be in what I would call quite a shutdown state, and just didn't have the relational capacity, but yet did have it once we got home, But it interested me, and it interested me what the loops did, and it also interested me, whether that's good or whether that's bad, I don't know, because I do have concerns about over-reliance on... I don't believe that was an over-reliance. I have concerns in general about over-reliance on these kinds of things for me, because they can be hard for me to then step out of, and it can be very, very attractive to be very withdrawn. And with my personality, maybe in certain frames of mind, that's not a good thing for me in terms of my mood, is to be too withdrawn.
So there was you talking about over-reliance on an external tool there that you might become over-reliant on, or maybe there's something even that's alongside addiction even.
Yeah.
There's a couple of analogies to throw in there to see if that's valid or not. You know, you wear glasses. Of course you're reliant on glasses. You've come to be reliant on glasses. If you'd never worn them, you'd have navigated the world without them and just been used to it to a point. But they are an external piece of machinery that you have on your head in order to improve that sense so that you can navigate the world better. That's one thing. And I think there is an analogy there to be had with earplugs, loops, calms, whatever. And then what that made me think of, we talked about this, and I don't think it was on a podcast, but we talked last time I was here, actually, about, you know, shoes that would give me a hidden couple 2 or 3 inches in height, because I am a very short male human, and that I had a pair of particularly kind of stacked trainers some years ago, and I had this rule in my head that I would never wear them on 2 consecutive days. Because they made such a social difference. It was very subtle, but it made such a social difference to how people treated me and how seriously people took me to be 2 or 3 inches taller than I actually am. That I thought, if I wear these more than like a day at a time, I will be addicted. I will not be able to do without them. It adds so much to the dynamic of me socially that I won't be able to do without them. So I had this rule. And it was my therapist who challenged that and, you know, basically said, well, why? If that improves your life, why not choose to, whenever you want and however you want, to deploy that? And that was great. And I did invest in a pair of these very special shoes, which give you the height, but they're not, most of the stacking is kind of inside the shoe.
People don't
so you don't
see
necessarily see that you're wearing great big high heels. They're really clever. And I had the maximum lift ones, which I think was about 3 inches, which is substantial. But I didn't end up being addicted. I didn't end up wearing them all the time. Now, this isn't a direct comparison, because what you are talking about is actually well, there is emotion. Of course, there is emotion in me being taken more seriously with other people. But this is your internal world. This is your internal world, and it's sensory. And there's something that you said, which maybe I'm going to ask you to say a little bit more on, about mood and the relationship there that might not be helpful for you.
That's a really good point, because yours would have increased your mood and possibly enhanced your relationships. I don't mean relationships.
No, you're right.
Just in a shop.
Just relating to people. No, you're absolutely right.
In the world.
Although inversely, though, it would have, you know, that enhancement only existed for as long as I was wearing them. That was my worry, that it would be so painful to lose that would be the kind of addictive aspect of being taller.
Absolutely. Similar to how, if, you know, in the old days people used to talk about power dressing, and, you know, especially women, if they're wearing their suit and they're power dressed for work and they're all made up, they're going to get all this respect. But if they just throw on their comfy clothes and run to the corner shop, they're just going to be treated like everybody else. No makeup, you know, and it leads to, you know, you have to always dress up or else experience such a different way in which you're treated one day according to the next. And I can see your thinking in that, and the disillusionment that, and then a lot of, you know, then there's a kickback, and for women it's like, well, then I'm not going to wear the shaped underwear every day, or I'm not going to, you know, put makeup on or wear the heels or whatever. But then just as many of us people, you know, we all wear clothes that make us feel good a lot of the time. Well, you know,
the entire point of clothes in the first place
is to do that.
Because originally just, you know, a fur to keep warm, but now of course we pick them based on what they make us look like, and that's not really us.
No. So I can really get your sense of, but I don't want to do that all the time. Just like, it causes a lot of pressure if we've got to make ourselves up every time we leave the house, whatever making ourselves up is defined by. But the payoff of that is that you feel potentially more belonging and more respect and more connectedness to the people around you. And for me, the thing about this was, in the same way as whenever you have a cold that you were describing, where you feel distant, you feel a bit like, I can't really participate here. I don't really want to talk to anybody because I can't hear them properly. They can't hear me properly. The same way as what I've heard people describe who maybe need a hearing aid and haven't got it with them. And when they're sitting in company, it's very upsetting because they can't, they feel very far away. And everybody's not sensitive to talk to the ear, to their good ear, as some people say. You know, and if you don't talk to that ear, I'm not going to hear you. And relationally, it's really detrimental. And, you know, if I didn't wear my glasses, relationally, that would be really detrimental because I wouldn't see people looking at me or, you know, trying to get my attention. I wouldn't pick up on things. Joint attention would be affected. Somebody would say, look at this. I wouldn't be able to see it far away, things like that. So those things improve our relationships. Actually, having worn the loops, relationally with Lana, I wasn't able to parent her as relational and as engaged a way as I possibly would have been without it. Now, as I said when I was talking about this, that has to be weighed up against how high my capacity for meltdown might have got, or her capacity for meltdown might have got, or our joint anxiety. So there's no right or wrong about any of this. But it is that experience of being removed relationally. Still might be a good idea in some occasions to be removed relationally, but on other occasions it's not always. So where I'd have been travelling alone on that evening, definitely numb yourself out, get yourself where you need to get. But relationally, I don't think it fits on the same level as glasses or some of the other things that you described. Is that a distinction worth making? That's kind of what I was moving towards, but in just a much more generalised way, and you've made that make much more personal sense. But yeah, there's the difference between dealing with your internal world and dealing with the world. And what I was talking about probably was more, in a way, superficial, dealing with the world. But what you were talking about was managing how you are in your internal experience versus how you are in the world, and that the compromises then you have to decide to make to be able to engage with your daughter, in this example, and to look after yourself in overwhelm. Yes. And of course, I guess, like, just to also point out, maybe that's just my own self-consciousness, it wasn't that I wasn't relating to her. She wasn't left abandoned on a tube somewhere.
No,
like
I don't think anybody would have thought that.
We were arm in arm the entire time, because that's how we walk around in these kind of situations. There was a lot of contact, there was a lot of safety, you know, there was a lot of closeness in terms of animation, and that was more shut down than it would normally have been between us. So there was still safety. It was not unsafe for her to be with me on the tube at that stage. And I've just had another example come into my head where so I've only started to use those loops relatively recently, and I was out in a context, and I'm going to anonymise all of this, but I was out in a context and the environment was such that it's really, really difficult for me to be in, mostly on a noise level point of view, mostly to do with noise and pitch and just the type of venue that it is, the high ceilings, the way all the echoes and the noises go off it. And because I now have access to the loops, I chose to put them in. And my experience on a sensory level of being in that place was so much better than ever in my life I've ever been in those places. So on that basis, it was wonderful, and I wished that I would have had access to that kind of accommodation in the past. And people that I was with were all neurotypical, and I didn't make a show of putting loops in my ears. So the majority, I would say, wouldn't have known. You know, potentially someone noticed that there was something, may have known what they were, or may have thought, for whatever reason, I had earphones in my ears. didn't draw attention, didn't express any curiosity, no one did. And my reflection was that actually in that scenario, though, I was not only by wearing the loops, but by generally attending to my comfort needs in a social setting. I could hear voices. There was a group, a good number of people there in part of my group. And I could choose to engage in certain conversations or sit back and not. And it's been a long time since I have not felt the clamour of that and not exerted so many spoons to deal with the environmental noise around me, straining to hear the people and straining to say something in some way supportive or encouraging as a conversational technique. And increasingly, part of my unmasking, part of my self-compassion journey is recognising that I have overexerted those kind of ways of being as a compensation, as a camouflaging, as a masking. That's why I became a therapist. That's why I'm very good at all of that kind of thing. And it all uses up so much battery so quickly. And something in not having the intensity reach me due to the loops. So it wasn't so loud, it wasn't so intense, it wasn't so urgent, it wasn't so present. And something that the loops did to make everything not so like that gave me the space to choose to participate or not to participate, which I imagine people who are not autistic
just have that choice all the time. Yes.
All the time.
Yes.
And so my version of being numbed out as if I have a cold might actually be non-autistic's version of being out in the world.
To bring our therapeutic selves in for the moment, or myself at least, there is also something about being unmasked and being facially very congruent with our feelings and reactions, and that being one of those ingredients of attunement with autistic clients. Now, I remember in my first therapy session with my therapist, her saying to me, just to let you know, I don't really have much control over my facial expressions. If I think something and I feel something, you'll probably see it play across my face. And it's true. And I'm very much the same. In fact, I would say it's dialed up because my reactions can actually be bigger, maybe, than a neurotypical one. And that's now part of my spiel with a new client is, I do not have a poker face, nor do I try to adopt one. When I'm surprised or amused or sad or angry, this is what you will see across my face. And to name that and to have it named to me, which is where it came from in the first place, was so, I imagine for some people that would be maybe daunting, or I better be careful as to how I relay information because, my therapist here might have a reaction. I don't think that's generally what happens. I think
probably they're not looking at you anyway, are they? Are they?
Well, obviously you can talk about, autism and eye contact, and that's...
Because when I talk, I don't look at the person, so I don't know how it's landing.
I'm quite good, if good is the word, at eye contact. Okay, so this is one of those many things that I've listed on and off throughout our careers as podcasters, is that I don't do that. There's that autistic thing of eye contact. Well, that's not me because I'm really good at eye contact. But then, like many of these other traits, I've noticed actually that I don't naturally hold eye contact. I've got tons of mechanisms that go on. They're not uncomfortable, but they do take spoons, but I didn't realise that until I became aware of them. Actually, if I'm suddenly distracted away from those techniques, I look down and left all the time. That's my default, actually. It's just that I can do it. It's not uncomfortable. It doesn't get into my consciousness and therefore get in the way of communication. So I do a level of eye contact, but now I'm aware of that. I don't force it like I used to, I guess, subconsciously. So that's part of it. You're right. We're not necessarily in that kind of contact. They may not see. But it's not just my facial expressions. I may gasp. I might swear. I've done that.
Your hands and move in your seat. That's because when I'm talking to you,
yes,
and I'm not, because when I talk to someone, I never give them eye contact. Mine's up and left.
Yes, I can see that right now. Yes, that's right.
And that's when I talk to anyone, I will not look at them in the eye. But, sometimes even whenever we're recording, I'm like, stop it. I can't look at you. I can't look at you. I can't look at you. It's not that I wasn't...
Because I'm looking at you?
No.
Or just generally?
What I mean is because you're moving. So if you were not moving, I wouldn't be looking at your eyes or your face anyway. So I don't know. It's not your eyes and your face that distract me. It's the whole movement of your body.
Distract. Okay.
For me, it's distraction. I couldn't talk if I was looking at someone. I'd be too distracted.
Wow.
That's why I don't talk looking at someone. I just don't talk.
Okay.
That's why eye contact is hard.
This is brand new news to me. that I do. I know that I shift my position regularly, and there is a physical discomfort that I do have. Just generally, and it is a nervous system thing. I don't think it's necessarily I've got a bad back or something like that, but I do need to shift my position from side to side much more regularly than I think would be ideal if you were trying to be a therapist who was very present and still. I accept that. Nobody's mentioned it to me before. That doesn't mean it hasn't been noticed, of course. But therapeutically, well, why was I bringing back that thing? Oh, yes. The absence of poker face that because I can't generate one is generally speaking for me, and especially because I do name it with everybody. This is an extra ingredient in the attunement, in the I'm going to react as, I'm going to be congruent in my reactions. As I was saying, yes, it isn't necessarily facial expressions. As I say, it can be a gasp, it can be swearing. I know I've said on more than one occasion when somebody has told me something about maybe somebody else's really unacceptable, shocking behaviour. I know I've said, oh, for fuck's sake, before. And actually, of course, it's the same thing, I guess, but dialed up. And I know there's plenty of therapists who will be tutting and sucking their teeth at my behaviour here. But it's not something I can necessarily have a great deal more control over. But it's the same as the most powerful intervention I've experienced as a client, as a patient, however you want to say it, somebody in therapy, where a psychologist, heard something about my background and did, jaw hit the floor, massive gasp, something that I'd always counted as a positive was actually seen as this dreadful negative. And how was I okay with that kind of thing? And it really, that's absolutely allowed me to reframe a particular part of my life in a really, really helpful way. Plus, there's a lot more empathy, I think, in those reactions than in a blank canvas, even emotional face. So there's something about partly it's about being unmasked, also it's just about not having that choice, really.
Yes. Yeah, and I don't want you to overgeneralise the thing that I said. My examples are coming from when you're getting really excited and want to interrupt me. And I can tell that not by looking at your face, but by your physical reactions. That's what I'm talking about here. So don't generalise it too much, because your body language, a lot of the time, you don't move any more than I move. So it's not that. But what it does show to me, and brings back to me as well, the most powerful thing that ever happened in my longest term therapy, which was with a psychoanalytic therapist, was whenever she allowed tears to roll down her cheeks, and I saw them, and I probably didn't see them start because I wasn't looking at her face.
Yes.
I wasn't looking. But at whatever time I did make a glance towards her face, you know, so it wouldn't have been eye contact when I was talking towards her face. There was still evidence of the tears, and that stayed with me. And you could suppose that I had maybe missed so much more compassion if I would have looked at her face. But I couldn't and can't do that. There's some protective mechanism that for me, I think, means that I can't take any of that in, good or bad. And there's probably trauma elements to that, as well as autistic overstimulation. But yeah, I do lots of eye contact when I'm listening, but when I'm talking, due to distraction, I think, I cannot look at anyone whenever I'm speaking. But I guess that maybe those kind of extra things are the thing that will stick to me. So if I talk to someone and then I look at them because I finished talking and I'm ready for them to speak, then I will get, for this person, I got the tears were still there, so that stayed with me.
Yes.
And maybe that's a delayed processing thing as well, maybe, that I can't get it at the time.
Delayed processing, yeah.
Delayed taking
and probably, more impact if you're talking to somebody, not seeing their reaction, and then noticing it and realising, which you must have done to see tears on somebody's cheek, that they have been crying. That's even more impactful, isn't it? Because of it's unexpected. Other than had you seen them react in real time and the tears start.
It might have stopped me.
To actually, well, that, absolutely.
Yeah.
But also to look up and go, oh my goodness, what an impact I'm having here.
Yeah.
Must have more.
Okay, that's just brought something up, actually.
What has?
It's not nothing just then. So that
silence.
Was some...
Let's call it silence, not nothing.
Yes, that's exactly what I was about to come to, name it. Yes. In that nothing, the audio part of that was silence. And that's the opposite, obviously, of stimulation, which, ironically, can be really overwhelming for some people. And it just so happens that has come up in a couple of recent sessions with a couple of different people, where one was kind of appreciating that space can exist, and the other found it overwhelming.
Yeah.
And was very uncomfortable with it in a way that was sensory. So there's another kind of overwhelm that we can get in therapeutic silence, which is just that a panic. I don't know what I'm supposed to fill this. I'm supposed to say something here. I'm doing this wrong, or thoughts are coming to me that I generally keep at bay with sound, or that's sensory stimulation.
Yeah.
Also, the absence, I suppose, of stimming as well, although that's totally allowed, and people do tend to, can choose to do that in a session, but. What was I coming to? Yeah, the discomfort part of that. I think we understand what the therapeutic value can be of that kind of space. But from an autistic point of view, that being a sensory overwhelm, I suppose there are two components to that. You're leaving me to carry on.
I know, because I don't have anything to jump in and say on that. I don't get overwhelmed by silence. So,
but do you? Is actually, in thinking about how you work, which certainly in terms of the sand tray work. Sorry, I'm forgetting whether you don't like sand play, but you say sand tray.
No,
you have.
It's okay.
That's what I couldn't remember.
That's okay. It's all right. It's okay.
Well, I needed to clarify for myself there, and you would have done.
In terms of the sand play.
In terms of the sand play therapy, what does happen in terms of silence? Because there is there's stimming going on. They're doing something.
Do you know that I call it stimming that's going on? There is a process going on. usually, but not always non-verbal. So, yeah, they're not talking. There are some people that like to say some things while they're doing it. Ordinarily, though, that will gradually decrease. They might do that the first try and then be able to feel safe enough not to talk. And I guess maybe if silence is uncomfortable, you might not be drawn to that kind of work anyway. It's very difficult to keep a conversation going when you go into that kind of meditative zone, which you are going into when you're doing that kind of work. The same as art therapy or music therapy or anything like that. It's very hard to keep a conversation going. Like it's not really conducive to it. So I guess you probably, by and large, are in a place where you're safe enough it feels safe enough and attractive enough to you to be in silence with me in that particular situation.
And because there's something else actually going on in the physical world, then I can see why that discomfort might not come up so much. Because I suppose, to go back to what I was saying about the discomfort of therapeutic silence, it isn't just the audio aspect of it. It is the perceived lack of interaction, because there absolutely is interaction that can go on in that silence and in that space. You know, I found it extremely uncomfortable in my first experience of ongoing therapy with, I've talked about them before, you know, my blank canvas therapist who didn't even greet you verbally. Wow. There wasn't even a hello. I mean, there would be if I said hello. They would respond, but it wasn't. It was clearly a rule, an absolute. You know, it was for me to open the conversation, even with the greeting. And I eventually just lent into that, and it was fine. I could come in and sit down. I think the record, because I'm autistic and I would time it, was like 25 minutes.
Of not speaking?
Of nothing, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess this isn't about slamming other therapeutic approaches. And I'm also aware that for many people with trauma histories, that's a massive demand to not be greeted. Like, that's almost like a reenactment of early trauma where they weren't welcomed into the world. You know, and to expect a baby to initiate anything is, you know, with the mother. Well, it's the mother that has to, you know, create the space for the baby to come into being. And for some people, if they've never had that, and then to go into a therapeutic encounter when they don't even have the basic niceties that they get when they walk into, when they're at a supermarket checkout.
That's exactly that's the exact example I just thought
of. You know,
yeah.
Like, it's really playing fast and loose with people's psyches. I said I wasn't going to slam anything, and there you go.
But people who do that are idiots.
Well, it's very risky.
I agree.
You know, I'd rather get it wrong by being too bubbly and be told to tone it down.
Exactly.
You know,
right. And I don't think we have that choice anyway, given who we are. You know, I know that it's just not available. But yes, I would absolutely always err on a welcome. I mean, not just I don't mean a greeting. I mean the space, the entire interaction. They are that people come and they are welcome.
And that isn't, and that chat. And what we talked about, you know, some people need the kind of, it's part of their entering in, isn't it, to have that warmth and that connection. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to do their therapy. Like, you know, you could say that it took you 25 minutes in that session to feel okay, to take up space, but, you know, that could have been done in a minute. You wouldn't have had to pay for another 24 to get yourself to that place.
Oh, I totally agree. I suppose what I'm saying is that there was, and it isn't again an autistic thing, that there were clearly rules as to how that particular space worked, and once I had gotten used to them, I was able to lean into it. I think that's what I meant. Would it have made a difference if I'd have known what I was at the time? And yes, it would have, because I'd have recognised that the discomfort that I initially had for quite a long time was valid, and that actually I could ask for that to be different, or that it just wasn't right for me and I needed to go and see somebody else. That, you know, now, because of how I am as a therapist, with, as we were saying, that welcome, you know, that how important that is throughout an interaction, throughout a conversation, throughout a relationship, then that validates, you know, what you're saying, that it has risks behaving that way. Also, though, what it reflects back to from one of our recent conversations is that nonsense of neutrality. That somehow, if I don't say anything, then I'm creating a neutral space. Every time we talk about this, I swear, you're fucking not. You're creating, potentially, depending on the person, a hostile space, or a very cold space, or an unfriendly space, as well as a very free and open space for other people, you know. But the idea that by not bringing yourself in at all, you're somehow doing something neutral.
Yes.
It's not possible. I keep banging on about this, and I think it's because I believe it more and more strongly.
Well, and I reacted, you have said, if I had known what I am, and I feel like going, what, human?
Yes.
It's got nothing to do with being autistic.
Yes.
But
it would have made a difference to how I'd have responded to that situation, with the confidence that I now have in that part of my identity, in that I am, because of that, I personally, it doesn't work for everybody in this way, it can work the opposite way, I feel more confident in asking for something that I feel that I need.
Yeah. Not necessarily to do with being autistic, though.
No, but for me, it's to do with
growth and
development,
and not every autistic person,
absolutely,
identified or not identified, is going to have that. In fact, a lot of people are not. Whoever they are, it's a big ask, and I'm not sure that really that is actualization. You know, that's the core thing that's going to make us feel better, is being able to stand up and say, I don't want you to reenact my trauma, please. You know, like, I kind of want more for people than that.
Thank you for listening to the Autistic License podcast. You can connect with us via Instagram, Facebook at autisticlicense.com, or by email at autisticlicense@gmail.com. And we spell license the British way, LICENCE. We also have a thriving Facebook community. Search for Autistic License Siana and Leo, or click on the link in the show notes.